Taylor Fritz went on a Twitch stream and answered a fan's question about how tennis scheduling works. Then something shocking happened. The next morning, he woke up to a firestorm. This is what happened. It's not as if he accused anybody or anything. He simply explained, with the kind of casual, behind-the-curtain honesty that most professional athletes never offer, the way the tour's hierarchy actually operates behind closed doors. And social media, because this is what social media does, decided he was whining. The backlash was immediate, and the misrepresentation thorough. And Fritz's response, when it came, was the kind of thing that tells you a lot about who this man actually is when the cameras he didn't ask to be on are suddenly pointing straight at him. Let's go back to the beginning, because the sequence of events here matters, and it gets lost in the noise when people reduce it to Fritz complained about Alcaraz. He was live on Twitch, playing World of Warcraft, a game he is, by all accounts, genuinely devoted to, which is itself a small but telling detail about a professional athlete who is comfortable enough in his own identity to spend his downtime doing something completely disconnected from tennis. A fan asked him a question, a simple, genuine, curious question about how match scheduling works on the ATP Tour. Fritz answered it, not angrily, not with the tone of someone who had been bottling something up and finally found an outlet. He answered it the way a person answers a question when they know the subject well and feel comfortable talking about it, clearly, specifically, with examples. He explained that scheduling priority on the ATP Tour follows a hierarchy that is directly tied to ranking and commercial value. The biggest names, Alcaraz, Sinner, Djokovic, get to choose their time slots, particularly the coveted night sessions that draw the largest television audiences, the fullest stadiums, and the most global attention. If they want the night session, they get the night session. If Fritz is their opponent on that particular day, then Fritz plays the night session too, whether that suits his preparation or not. He positioned himself in that hierarchy with notable self-awareness, not at the top, not complaining about being left out, but simply explaining where the line is drawn. As the top-seeded American at many events, he acknowledged that he probably sits around priority number 3 on the days he plays, which gives him some say in the scheduling of outside court matches, but essentially no leverage when he is on the main court facing one of the 3 players sitting above him in the pecking order. If I play Novak, and he wants to play me at night, they gonna put my ass at night. That's the quote, the one that started everything. Read it again. There is no grievance in it. There's no bitterness. There's no implication that the system is wrong or that Djokovic shouldn't have that privilege. It is a factual description of how the world works, delivered with the kind of blunt, self-deprecating humor that Fritz tends to lean into when he is relaxed and speaking to an audience he trusts. He even added more detail, explaining that the draw structure means that Alcaraz and Sinner are split into opposite halves, so they alternate days of priority. One day Alcaraz gets his pick. The next day Sinner gets his. Then whoever the next highest seeds are on that particular day gets a say, working down the hierarchy until it reaches him. It is, in other words, a reasonably fair and structured system, and Fritz was not suggesting otherwise. The clip got posted to X. A Spanish journalist named Alberto Marone, sports editor at a publication called AS, saw it and fired off a response that landed somewhere between dismissive and condescending. He wrote that if Fritz wanted to choose when he played, the solution was simple: win several Grand Slams and become world number 1. He said it would be strange if a player ranked 150th made a request before facing Alcaraz, Sinner, or Djokovic, and had it granted over the others. The obvious issue with that response, beyond the fact that it completely misread what Fritz had actually said, is that Fritz is not ranked 150th. He is one of the best players on the ATP Tour, ranked inside the world's top 10, a Grand Slam finalist at the 2024 US Open, and the defending champion at Indian Wells 4 years prior. to strawman his comments by invoking a hypothetical 150th ranked player is not just inaccurate. It is the kind of lazy internet hot take that prioritizes the performance of having an opinion over the substance of engaging with what was actually said. Fritz deleted his initial response to Moran, which had included a jab at the journalist's surname, a low blow that he clearly thought better of within hours, but did not retreat from his fundamental position. Instead, he posted a clarifying statement that addressed the accusations of complaining directly and methodically. He noted that he had been asked how scheduling works by a fan on his stream and had answered accordingly. He was not the one who turned it into a story. He was not the one who framed it as a complaint. He pointed out that the better and more decorated players will usually have more say in when they play, and added plainly that they have earned that right. He was defending the very system that people were accusing him of attacking. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Me getting on stream and thoughtfully answering questions for fans isn't something I am doing for me, but for the fans that support me enough to want to come in and ask me questions live. If people want to misinterpret and turn the things I say against me and turn it into unwarranted hate towards me, then maybe it's not worth it. That statement, posted in the aftermath of the backlash, is worth reading carefully because it contains more than just frustration. There is a genuine and understandable wariness in it. Fritz is one of the most accessible and fan-engaged players on the ATP Tour. He goes live on Twitch regularly, interacts with his audience, answers the kinds of questions that most top 10 players deflect with rehearsed press conference language, and operates in a way that treats his supporters like adults who deserve honest answers, rather than carefully managed messaging. The cost of that openness, as he discovered this week, is that a single clip taken out of context can be weaponized into a narrative that bears no resemblance to what was actually said. And the threat embedded in that final line, "Maybe it's not worth it," is not a tantrum. It is a reasonable person reaching a reasonable conclusion about what the incentives of public candor actually look like in 2026. Moran, to his credit, eventually deleted his post and apologized to Fritz for the hasty characterization. That resolution doesn't undo the hours of misrepresentation that preceded it, but it does at least close the loop on a story that could have festered. The fact that it resolved quickly, with both parties moving on before it could calcify into a proper beef, says something positive about the tennis community's capacity to course correct when things tip too far. The internet, once it has latched onto a narrative, does not always give that kind of grace. Fritz got lucky in that respect. But the underlying conversation, the one that Fritz was actually having before it got hijacked by the drama of alleged complaints and social media pylons, is a genuinely interesting one that deserves more serious attention than it got. Because the scheduling question in professional tennis is not as simple as the best players get the best slots and everyone else should be grateful. It is a system with real consequences for real people, and the fact that a top 10 player felt the need to walk back an honest explanation of how it works because of public pressure is itself a symptom of something worth examining. Night sessions at the major tournaments are, as Fritz correctly explained, commercially valuable events. The stadium is full. The television audience is at its largest. The atmosphere is different from a 1 p.m. start on a weekday, more electric, more intense, more memorable. For the players given that platform, the benefits are obvious. But there are costs too. Night sessions end late, often very late, particularly when matches go the distance. A player finishing a 5-set thriller at 1 a.m. and then returning to the court for a 4th-round match at midday the following day is dealing with a recovery window that is significantly shorter than their opponent may have had. When the players who get the night sessions are also the ones who tend to win those matches and go deep into tournaments, because they are, by definition, the best players, the fatigue question compounds over multiple rounds in a way that, for their opponents, can be genuinely difficult to manage. There is also the question of preparation rhythm. Every professional tennis player has a pre-match routine that is built around their scheduled start time. A warm-up, a hitting session, a meal, a sleep pattern calibrated to the hour they expect to walk onto the court. When that start time is determined the night before by someone else's preference, when you are told at 11 p.m. that tomorrow's match has been moved from the afternoon session to the night session because your opponent requested it, the disruption to that routine is real. It is not catastrophic. These are professional athletes with support teams and decades of experience adapting to the unexpected. But the idea that scheduling priority carries no meaningful competitive implication is naive. And Fritz was not wrong to describe the system as one with a clear hierarchy that advantages those at the top. The reality just happened to be one that some people in the tennis media preferred not to acknowledge when stated plainly. The broader point is this: when a top 10 player explains that the world number 1 gets to choose when he plays and that the rest of the field adapts around that choice, he is not making a controversial claim. He is describing the commercial logic of professional sport. The tournaments want Alcaraz on the main court under the lights because that is what sells tickets, what drives television ratings, what generates the kind of global coverage that keeps the sponsors happy and the prize money growing. That is not a conspiracy. That is a business model. Fritz knows it, accepts it, and explained it without editorializing. The reaction, therefore, was not a response to what he said. It was a response to the discomfort that sometimes surfaces when the unspoken hierarchies of professional sport are spoken aloud by someone who sits just outside the very top tier. This is not a complaint. It is a fact about how scheduling decisions interact with competitive outcomes over the course of a major tournament. Fritz was not arguing that the system should change. He was not even implying that it was unfair. He was explaining how it works. The distinction matters enormously, and the people who missed it did so either because they weren't listening carefully or because a simpler narrative was more useful to them. There is also a broader context here about where Fritz sits in the conversation about the American generation of tennis players, because it's relevant to how this whole episode played out. Fritz is the standard bearer of American men's tennis right now, the highest-ranked American on the ATP Tour, a player who has reached a Grand Slam final, who has beaten Djokovic on multiple occasions, who won Indian Wells in 2022 and went back there as a perennial contender year after year. He is not a fringe figure. He is not someone whose opinion on how the tour operates can be easily dismissed. But Fritz exists in a strange position within the American tennis conversation that rarely gets examined properly. American men's tennis has been waiting for a genuine major champion since Andy Roddick at the 2003 U.S. Open, a wait that has now stretched past 2 decades and through a generation of players who showed promise without quite delivering the ultimate goods. Fritz, John Isner, Jack Sock, Sam Querrey, Francis Tiafoe, each of them carried the banner for a period, generated excitement at various stages, and ultimately couldn't get over the line at a Grand Slam. Fritz is the closest American man has come to ending that drought since Roddick, reaching the 2024 U.S. Open final before losing to Sinner in 4 sets. The hunger in the American tennis-watching public for a native champion at their home major is real and it is palpable. And Fritz carries that weight, whether he invites it or not. The result is a dynamic where Fritz's every word and action gets measured against an implicit standard that is simultaneously unfair and entirely unavoidable. When he speaks candidly about the mechanics of the tour, some sections of the media read it as an athlete making excuses. When he loses early at a major, it is treated as a referendum on the health of American men's tennis, rather than a single match result. When he wins, and he wins regularly, including a Dallas final in 2026, the response is measured, qualified, situated in the context of whether this particular win means something for his trajectory. He has never quite been allowed to just be a very good tennis player who sometimes says interesting things. He is always also a symbol, a representative, a carrier of something larger than himself. That is a lot to manage, and it probably goes some way toward explaining why, when this week's misrepresentation arrived, his frustration was as sharp as it was. But the American tennis press and the broader tennis media have sometimes struggled to figure out exactly how to handle Fritz, because he does not fit neatly into the templates that tend to generate the most engagement. He is not the volatile personality that writes itself. He is not the underdog narrative. He is not the global superstar whose every word is treated as a press release. He is a very good, very honest tennis player who tends to say what he thinks, which is simultaneously one of his most appealing qualities and one that leaves him consistently exposed to misrepresentation. His 2026 season has been, by his own standards, uneven. He dealt with tendinitis and knee issues in the offseason that disrupted his preseason preparation. He lost to Lorenzo Musetti in the fourth round of the Australian Open, a result that was disappointing given his seeding and the form he had shown in Melbourne in previous years. He reached the final of the Dallas Open, a result that, in isolation, looked solid, but lost it to fellow American Ben Shelton in a match that Shelton controlled from start to finish. The form has been there in flashes, but not consistently enough to suggest he is operating at the level he knows he is capable of. Indian Wells, his home tournament, the place where he has performed best throughout his career, is the obvious opportunity to reset the narrative around his 2026. And yet, heading into that tournament, this is what the conversation became. A scheduling explanation from a Twitch stream, a Spanish journalist misread, a brief social media fire, and a clarification that should never have been necessary. It is the kind of story that, when you look back at it from the outside, feels almost absurdly disproportionate. The original comment was benign. The backlash was manufactured. The resolution was swift. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the actual point that scheduling on the ATP Tour operates on a clear and commercially driven hierarchy got almost entirely lost. The question of whether that hierarchy is the right system is a legitimate one, and it is one that the players themselves have been quietly debating for years. The broader calendar debate, which has seen Alcaraz, Djokovic, Goff, and others speak publicly about the physical toll of the current tour schedule, is the backdrop against which all of this sits. At the 2025 Shanghai Masters alone, the cracks in the system were impossible to ignore. Alcaraz withdrew before the tournament started with an ankle injury. Sinner retired from a third-round match with cramping. Djokovic vomited during one match and required back treatment during another. 3 of the top 4 players in the world, broken down in the same week at the same event, is not a coincidence. It is a symptom of a calendar that asks too much from too many players for too long. Fritz himself has been vocal about this, not just this week, but consistently over the past 2 seasons. He has said plainly that the tour schedule needs to be shortened, that the number of mandatory events creates a physical burden that accumulates in ways that only become visible at the wrong moments. He raised a completely separate but telling concern this week alongside the scheduling story. He publicly criticized the quality of the Dunlop balls being used at Indian Wells and called for more frequent ball changes, arguing that deteriorating ball condition affects play quality and potentially increases injury risk. These are not the concerns of someone who is complaining for the sake of it. They are the concerns of a professional athlete who thinks carefully about the conditions in which he and his colleagues are asked to compete, and who is willing to say so publicly even when the response is unpredictable. The PTPA, the Professional Tennis Players Association, founded by Djokovic and Vasek Pospisil, has been pursuing legal and structural challenges to the existing governance of the sport for several years, arguing that player interests are underrepresented in the decisions that most affect their livelihoods. Scheduling is one element of that conversation. Prize money distribution is another. The length of the season is a third. These are not abstract concerns. They are the daily realities of players who travel 40 weeks a year, play through injuries that would sideline athletes in other sports, and navigate a commercial structure that was designed primarily around the interests of broadcasters and tournament organizers rather than the people hitting the tennis balls. Fritz, speaking honestly about one small corner of that structure, the scheduling hierarchy, was, whether anyone intended it that way, a window into a much larger conversation that professional tennis has been having with itself for years. None of that found its way into the conversation this week, because the conversation this week was about whether Taylor Fritz was complaining about Carlos Alcaraz getting a better time slot. He wasn't. He said so clearly, on multiple occasions, in multiple formats. And Morone, the journalist who started the fire, confirmed as much when he deleted his post and apologized. The story resolved. The truth won, eventually, as it usually does when enough time passes and the noise dies down. What lingers, though, is the question of incentive. If a top 10 player can say something completely reasonable, completely accurate, and completely devoid of self-pity, and still spend a full news cycle defending himself against accusations of whining, then what does that tell you about the kind of public engagement professional tennis players should rationally choose? The answer, unfortunately, is that it tells you to say less, to be more guarded, to give the press conference answer rather than the Twitch answer, even when the Twitch answer is the more honest and useful one. Fritz said as much in his own clarification, floating the possibility that this kind of public engagement might not be worth the cost. That would be a loss, not for Fritz, he will be fine either way, but for everyone who benefits from athletes who are willing to talk about how their world actually works, rather than how the official communications team would prefer it to be described. What are your thoughts on this? Make sure to drop a comment below on whether you think Fritz was being treated unfairly, or do you think there was something in the backlash? Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you do not miss out on the latest tennis news.